Hi, and welcome to the Human Kinetics Virtual Health and Physical Education Conference. This session is Dynamic Physical Education, continuing the legacy of physical education teacher education. My name is Aaron Beighle. I'm one of the authors of Dynamic Physical Education, and I'm going to be presenting just a few minutes tonight on, I guess it's probably not tonight for you, but tonight for me, on a little bit of background on dynamic physical education, not as much in depth about what the text is and what the textbooks say, but more about the background and a little bit of history of where they've come from. So I'm going to share my screen and get started. All right. So you can see here, there's two versions of the book. There's the dynamic physical education for elementary school children, and there's dynamic physical education for secondary school students. I'm going to be presenting tonight for this session. Heather Irwin is also a co-author, and I'll talk about the authorship and how that's evolved over time in a little bit. Just again, without sounding like grandparents, I'll talk a little bit about the history. Dynamic physical education has been around, the textbook has been around for 50 years. These aren't in any real order here. You can see this is 6th edition. This is old, this is newer. There's some other ones on here. This one's have been around. There are several on here that some of you may recognize and have used. I just share this to show that it's been around a while, a long time, and there's a little bit of history, but just a brief touching on what has influenced this book over the course of 50 plus years. As you know, in the field of physical education, we've gone through lots of changes. And one thing that you will see is the pedagogical influences that show themselves in the book, and the book has evolved over time. Movement education is a part of the book. Perceptual motor programs have been a part of the book. An emphasis on fitness that's been around. The emphasis on academic achievement has been around, and the book has really evolved and stayed pretty steadfast in its tenets of quality physical education and why we have quality physical education. There's also been some social influences that have influenced what's in the textbook. Public health has become an important part of all of our lives, and especially in physical education, and maybe some of our approaches in physical education. Accountability in education, no doubt, has led to some changes in what we do in education and what we do in physical education, and what we can expect. And when those changes happen, the textbook has to change to evolve to meet that, and to meet those expectations, and to prepare teachers. Again, that's what the book is for, is to prepare teachers to go into that environment. The research, this is one that you could go on and on and on. I've just picked a few here. Research on physical activity has influenced the textbook over time. Research on what we know about pedagogy, and what we know about youth, and what we know about teaching climates, and teaching strategies and teaching methods. School-based initiatives, it seems like we always have different school-based initiatives, and whether it goes from most recently the 21st century 21st century learning skills, then to social emotional learning, lots of variability, and that, trying to keep up with that, but then not get too trendy is a definite balance with writing a textbook like this. Behavior change has also been something we look at if we're working in education to change behavior. And then there's been a little bit of reality that influences the book. Time for physical education, which goes back up to what I talked about, accountability. Really, in education, change is the only constant. And if I was told when I first started teaching that making change in education is like moving a graveyard, so making big change, but change is always there. It's constantly. Every year there's a new term for outcomes, or learning initiatives, or an emphasis in your district. So there's constant changes, and that definitely impacts and is a reality check. And then the last thing is a little bit of a muddled mission, because back up to what I talked about with pedagogy influences, social influences, research, we're kind of a moving target in physical education. And one of the things we try to do with this textbook is to not be such a moving target, to try and hold steadfast to this is why we have physical education. And I hope you see that as I talk a little bit tonight. Um, just a little bit about the authors. This is um, the little bit of the history lesson. So Dr. Vic Dower was at Washington State University, and he got a grant in 1968. And with part of that grant is he traveled Europe. And so if you look at the textbooks, there's a lot of European influences. In fact, one of the activities that we use with rhythms is called European running. And so there's a heavy influence, especially when you look at gymnastics, some of the body awareness and those types of things. You'll see a lot of influence of Europe. So then he came back, and with all that information, he authored the first edition. At the same time, he had a doctoral student named Bob Pangrazi, and he was the PE. He was started off as a kindergarten teacher, was a physical education teacher, and then became the physical education supervisor in Pullman, Washington, where Washington State is. And most of you know Bob, he's the current author. And so he's been a part of this since 1968 and how this has evolved, and going from the textbook to the lesson plans. And if you go back through, and I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of these older copies, it's fascinating to look at the evolution, but in some ways how far ahead of the game this particular textbook was back in 1968. At Arizona State, Bob worked with Dr. Paul Darst, and they started the secondary version of the textbook. And then you have me, who I put on here as the luckiest man on earth. Again, I've been surrounded my life with great people, and Bob and Paul have taken me under their wing and allowed me to be a part of this. And I'm just on their coattails. I'm not afraid to admit that. And then also Tim Brousseau, who is at University of Utah, and Heather Irwin, who is at the University of Kentucky, have also come on as the secondary version of the book. So this is kind of where the book has come from, a little bit of the background of what influenced it. These are the authors, where it started from. And hopefully I'll be able to talk a little bit about the foundation of what this is. This is my weak attempt over here with the foundation of physical education, or foundation of this textbook. So foundation is the standards. And early on, they had their own version of the standards, Bob and Vic did. The standards came along in 1996. So the book had been out 30 some years, and DPE does address those standards. Most physical education curricula do. This is one that I've been most fascinated with in the last, probably 2-3 years of my career. In the first edition of the book, they talk about the needs and characteristics of students. And this leads to student-centered, nothing earth-shattering there. But what I find amazing now is as we move through this and we come back to this in physical education and start to say, you know what we need to focus on? The needs and urges and characteristics of youth. That's what we need. Not only do we need to help students find the activities they enjoy, but do that in a manner that addresses their needs and characteristics. And we're starting to address that and come back to that. Well, the original book in 68 had that in there. And I think it's an important piece. I hope we don't get away from it, because I think this leads back to why we do what we do in physical education, and because we are very student-centered, based on the needs that what they need, not what physical education teachers like to teach, et cetera. Physical activity. This has been an emphasis of this textbook from the beginning. Probably a little different maybe in 68 than it is now. But essentially, if you look through the history of physical education, whether you look at the Swedish influence, the German influence, most of what we come back to is always we want to be about physical activity, and we want students to move. And that's what I mean by there's been some ebb and flow of what's important in our field. And the book has maintained pretty steady that we want to be about movement, and we want to be about physical activity. Social and personal responsibility has been a part of, again, as I talked to Bob, I never met Vic, but as I talked to Bob Pangrazi, teaching kids to be better human beings, which is social and personal responsibility, is the foundation of everything we do as educators. And this has been a foundation of this, whether it be with managerial processes, management skills of students, teaching efficient lessons, all of those are designed to make students better people. Inclusive, if you look back, and I point up here, I'm fortunate enough on my bookshelf to have some of the original books, and there's always been about making adaptations for all students. And I don't know who said this, but all quality physical education is adapted physical education. It's everything is modified. If you've been teaching long enough, you don't know the real rules to anything, because you constantly are modifying and making games and changing activities and modifying the activities and reworking the activities for an individual student. And I think this was ahead of the time as far as being inclusive of all students and making sure all students had positive experiences in physical education. And there's always been a focus of process. What are the cues to performing a skill, and how do we help students to accomplish those cues? Well ahead of any use of motivational theory or anything like that, the focus has been on success yields enjoyment, and enjoyment yields sustainability. If you have successful experiences, and that doesn't mean you're highly skilled at an activity, it means you have a successful experience, and the teacher creates success. But that yields enjoyment and it yields sustainability. So that's some of the foundational information and foundational principles. There is a little bit of foundation on related to the research. And as I just talked about, motivational research is intertwined in all of this. Physiological research, whether it's fitness, whether it's maturation, whether it's bone development, all of these you'll see sections and components of that. Motor learning research, how do you teach concepts? How do you teach skills, motor skills to individuals? I've talked about the pedagogy research, borrowing from the classroom research, borrowing from physical education research, doing some of the own physical education research on our own. And then related to motivation is psychological and sociological research and understanding how that fits in. So if you've ever looked at the textbooks, the front half of the book includes a lot of this kind of stuff. And then this kind of foundational information, and then it's all applied in the second half in specific, like introductory activities, fitness activities, etc. So in the elementary textbook, we have a few, I guess what I'm calling here is foci, if you'll let me say that instead of focus, which foci doesn't sound as good, but focuses sounds better, but I get the English part of this. So some argue with me on this, and that's okay. They're wrong. I'm just kidding. If you don't agree with me on this, I'd love to hear from you. Actually, I'm going to give you my email and stuff at the end, so I'd love to hear from you. We want activity to be an enjoyable experience, especially at the elementary level where they're just getting introduced to this whole idea. We want to focus on the process. So we want to focus on the cues of performing a skill, or focus on challenging your students, or focusing on just going through the movement and moving rhythmically, as opposed to memorizing a dance and being able to perform it without flaw. We want to help students discover what they like and don't like related to skills, fitness, activities. And not only do we want them to learn what they like and don't like, but start to understand why they like and don't like. So I don't like soccer. Why not? Is it because it's too competitive? Is it because you don't have the skills? And we start to find this out with students. And if because they don't have the skills, we can help them. If they don't like competition, if it's too fast paced for them, okay, they start to understand it. Doesn't mean they don't play soccer in physical education, but they start to understand why I like activities, why I don't like activities, and they can, hopefully this process will continue throughout their entire time in physical education. We adapt activities to fit students' needs, characteristics, urges. So instead of just, you'll see great teachers do this, and instead of just saying, okay, we're going to take this hula hoop and we're going to roll it on the floor, they'll sell a story and say, you know what, we have pulled over on the side of the road and we're going to have to take our tire all the way down the road. Selling it to kids because they like adventure, giving kids a reason to challenge themselves. All of these things are about giving students what they need, as opposed to, we're just going to give them the specifics and let them move on. I've already talked about inclusion, not exclusion of all students related to abilities, gender, disabilities, religion. It comes into play a lot, other variables as well, but to be inclusive of all students. And then obviously we want to focus on, as I've mentioned several times, exploration, self-expression, letting students create, explore activities, explore equipment, learning to value physical activity, learning to challenge themselves, and learning to move and liking to move. The secondary version. Um, Let me get through all these for, sorry. So we want students throughout the programs at the elementary level and the secondary level, we want students to have some choice. But at the secondary level, they start to have more choice. The learning experiences need to be more authentic because students cognitively become to understand these ideas, and they can start to grasp why we're doing activities, understanding the how and why of activity. They start to find activities they enjoy. And again, continuing from the elementary, they start to realize why they enjoy activities. And it could be, why do you like, when we do a walking lesson, which by the way is a phenomenal lesson that we don't do enough in physical education, but we do a lesson on walking, and you like to go walk by yourself. Why is that? You like the solitude, you can think, you can listen to your music, whatever the reason is. That's an important thing for students to understand. Not only do they like walking out by themselves, but why do you like walking out by yourself? It could be, you know what, you love competition. So you might like team sports. And so you like that. You might like competition and you like tennis, or you might not like competition, but you like tennis. So you can go hit with a partner, hit with a wall, and getting kids to start to understand that. So not only finding activities they enjoy, but finding out why they enjoy those activities. And also at the secondary level, we can start to, I think some would argue you could do this upper elementary as well, which I think is fine. But more emphasis on models based, whether it's TGFU, whether it's sport education, because we've structured the lesson plans in such a manner. I say we as if I've done anything. They did, Bob and Vic and Paul. Structured these lessons that you can add different models. You can use fitness education during the fitness part of the lesson, or you can do TGFU for your focus, or there's lots of different, you can do adventure ed maybe for a game. So there's lots of ways to integrate a variety of models. So that leads me to a little bit of some of the uniqueness of this of dynamic physical education is there's a 4-part lesson. And the 4-part lesson, as you can see down the bottom, is the introductory activity, fitness development, which is probably a little bit of a misnomer. We're not really trying to develop fitness. We're not concerned with whether kids are fit or not. We're trying to teach them about moderate to vigorous physical activity, trying to teach them what it feels like, what type of activities that it can be for everybody. It doesn't have to be, but it can be, and that maybe showing them some enjoyable experiences. The lesson focus, which is the bulk of the lesson, tends to focus more on the skills, really addressing, teaching some concepts in depth. And we have allocated how much time and things in other documents. And then the closing activity, which is like the game. So there is this 4-part lesson. And one of the unique pieces of this, and I have it at the bottom and I have it up at the top too, we're ready to use lesson plans. The uniqueness, I think, of this textbook is that with the textbook, not only the front part with the theoretical background information, there's a whole probably 350, 400 pages of variety of activities you can use to, including activities and address the standards, all of them do. And then coming with that is the lesson plans that are used, and the lesson plans apply all of that. So not only do you have the theory, you have the activities, but you have the activities organized in what can be a lesson plan for you, and it's ready to use. I think one of the influences, or one of the unique characteristics of this book is the management is essential. Not only do we say it, we spend time on it. And the videos, we have a website called dynamicpeasap.com. That'll be show up here in a second. That addresses this and shows videos of teachers teaching with management, but it's an essential piece of this. And if you look at the lesson plans, it looks like a lot of information to teach, but if you manage students, it can be done. Now, the lesson plans are usually meant to teach 3 or 4 lessons as opposed to 1 lesson, but you have to be efficient to get a lot of that accomplished. Does it work? It's been piloted for 50 years. Everything we do is nothing is put in the book unless it's been done by teachers, been tested. Lesson plans, activity ideas aren't put in the book unless they've been used. And that's an important, for us, that's an important piece of this. So we've done some research with this, and you can look at that, and I'd be more than happy to talk to you about the research. But what I really wanted to spend just a second to say, Nothing is put in this book that's not used and hasn't been used more than once. It's used over and over and over and refined. For example, when I was out at Arizona State getting my doctorate with Bob, tennis wasn't in the book, but we refined it and worked with teachers and got their feedback and kept working and kept working and kept working. And now tennis is in the book. That is one of the things I think is so unique, but a strong characteristics of that we know this works. So what's the legacy of quality physical education according to us in this textbook? We want kids to leave with a positive feeling toward physical activity. We want youth who are competent in a few self-selected physical activities. They pick them. They might pick badminton and swimming. Okay, that's what you leave with. But they understand how to learn too. So later in life, if they want to learn golf, they understand that it's going to be, there's a learning curve and you're not going to be very good early on. And we want students to know that. So we're very intentional about that. And ultimately, our result and what we're trying to do in physical education is have physically active youth who mature into active adults. And that's what the purpose of the textbook is. We've designed the textbook with the idea that these ideas that are used in physical education, we need to be using those in teacher preparation as well. So we have a textbook, again, and the lesson plans that help make that seamless transition. One of the things that, if you've ever had a chance to go out to Mesa, Arizona and see it, we're doing it here in Lexington as well, is we work with teachers and they give us feedback for the textbook. We use the textbook, we use these criteria at the University of Kentucky. And then when students go to student teach, it's very seamless. And then they get jobs in Lexington. And so there's a seamless transition from having the textbook and us as professors and you as a professor, if you're using the book, and then you have a teacher that uses the book and then they use the book, and it just continues this cycle of creating a program, which we know we've done some research on that we know that works. So in closing, again, I told you I wasn't going to take much of your time. I want to say thank you. Thank you for giving me some time. I know you're busy. If you have any questions about the textbooks, either one of them, let me know. I authored the elementary version. I know Tim Brousseau very well. I know Heather Irwin very well. Some of you may know I'm married to Heather. She usually sits in that desk right there. And I'd be more than happy to answer your questions and help you understand or give you some feedback on how we use dynamic PE, how you might, and specific to your situation, to prepare teachers to get it into schools. And again, teachers don't have to teach just like you. Our teachers here give us feedback and we change how we do things based on their feedback. And that's been the tradition of dynamic PE, is making sure teacher feedback is used and heard throughout the book. So I thank you for your time. This is my email address, is uky.edu, at Aaron Beighle. I'm on Twitter as well, and I would love to hear from you and give you our time, because we want to help in any way we can, and be more than happy to hear your feedback as well on the book. So if there's anything I can ever do for you, please let us know, and we look forward to hearing from you, and thank you for your time.